light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. There's a particular verse I heard a number of years ago that remains one of my primary inspirations. Before I give a version of the verse, though, to put this in context, I guess, in actuality, I find myself to be mostly an introvert in terms of wanting to withdraw from the world and preferring quiet sorts of things and finding too much around me to be a bit overwhelming at times. And I like interacting with people, but I like things in a quiet, more focused sort of fashion. And I don't know that many people would guess that about me, though, having my own television show and being so outgoing and so forth. But I guess my understanding of, even as an introvert, my understanding of being a citizen in this or any country, really, is that because you're part of a society, because you're an individual within a community, you are inescapably part of that community. And whether you're accepted or marginalized or whatever you are, you're still there. And because you're still there, you're still part of it. There's a sense in which part of who we are is given to us. Part of who we are is what we do with that, how we change it, how we shift it, how we express it, what parts of it we choose to express and what parts we choose to change. And then part of who we are is what we leave to those who come after us. As an individual within a community, and with that awareness of being these creatures of time that both receive and give, and as well as be present in the now, the community has, every community, and for each community it's slightly different, but every community has a certain set of values, some of which have been codified into laws, certain dynamics that need to be there in order for the community to continue to function. One of the ones I value very highly is what I call self-agency, or other people might say personal freedom. The idea to act as your own agent, to have your own voice. Those, in some parts of human history, those sorts of abilities have been really repressed and controlled by self-serving tyrants and despots and rulers of various descriptions. Governments that wanted everything to be just this way, and they didn't care what was true or honest or real or needed within their people. They wanted the world this way, and if they had to kill half their population, they were going to have it that way. I don't know, those systems basically run their course. A lot of people die, and then they basically blow up because those are not sustainable ways of behaving. The challenge within the present time, and I guess previous times as well, is when a threat or a bribe or anything comes against a community or a country. I would say, and possibly this is a little bit extreme, but thankfully most of us aren't called upon to act on it at any point, but every citizen has a duty. If they are a member of a country, and if they believe in their country, if they're not trying to emigrate out of their country, they have a duty by receiving the blessings of that country to stand for its endurance, and if necessary, to lay their life on the line for their country, to be willing to give their life for the country. Every person who ever goes through military service in a formal sense, of course, knows this, that at any point they could be called upon to sacrifice their life for their country. I believe the same sort of dynamic applies equally to citizens, and that having professional military, if you will, occupational military, it's a way that we've kind of outsourced our defense to a certain group of people instead of everyone in the country embracing and accepting their responsibility in a very conscious, direct fashion for the security and defense of their country. Not every country does it this way. I'm told in Scandinavia, for example, the countries there have a very, very small standing army, but the majority of the population has been trained in national defense, such that if anyone were to ever attack their country, 90% of the population could be mobilized overnight. I mean, that's not something that I would think any invading army wants to deal with, when suddenly you find that everyone in the town you're attacking has a gun and knows how to use it and knows how to operate in a cohesive fashion for the defense of their community. I mean, that would be very difficult to come up against. A very worthy adversary, a very difficult adversary to overcome, if everybody was that prepared to defend. But there is a sense in which that applies to every country, because if one is not willing to sacrifice one's life for one's country, if a politician is threatened and told, you will do what we say or we will kill you, or we will kill you and your family, the ideal response is to say, well, then you'll have to kill me and my family, because my country is bigger than me and my family. There have been numerous countries that on a long path to their independence, millions, I suppose the prime example that comes to my mind is Estonia, which was documented in the movie The Singing Revolution, which is an incredibly inspiring movie. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to go to your library and find a copy. It's called The Singing Revolution. But in there it mentions how during various periods of time, millions of Estonians were slaughtered by the despotic countries ruling over them, and by the tyrants and the oppressors. And there was concern that they might be altogether wiped out. Thankfully they weren't. But when a greedy or self-serving or tyrannical or military power says to a politician, you must do what we say or we will kill you, the politician really, if they're a true patriot, needs to say, well, then pull the trigger, because I'm not going to collaborate with your plans. Because if they do, they essentially sell out their country, their children and their grandchildren and all the future generations to do the same. They pass that same choice on to the next person and the next person and the next person. And to the extent that everyone says, I would rather not be killed than stand up for my country, the sovereignty of the country, the identity of the country, the identity of the people is exterminated, and it's not there anymore, and everything about who they are is totally dictated by the new oppressor, who basically says, you do as I say or I'll kill you. I heard the phrase a long time ago, perhaps even in childhood, and it always made more sense to me to agree to say that I'd rather be oppressed and killed for what I am than rewarded and allowed to live for what I am not. To spend my whole life living a lie, to spend my whole life being someone that I don't respect. If I want my children and grandchildren and future generations of people in my country to experience the same freedom and self-determination and quality of life that I enjoy, rather than being narcissistic and selfish and just saying, I don't care about anyone but myself, reward me with lots of riches and I'll be your slave. That dishonors your own name, it dishonors your country, it sells your country into slavery. It gives the future nothing good to look forward to. If we give in, it's essentially an embrace of slavery. It may not be ugly, it may not be violent, it may not be literal at the moment, but it is absolutely real. And it strips future generations of freedom, of self-determination, of self-agency, of all the things that make being an individual and being an independent country worthwhile. If you're not going to be independent, if you're not going to have your own voice for your own life, what is the point of putting up with all the struggle that life will unavoidably include? There's no justification for it. As an autistic man, with a brain that's wired backwards and consequently sees too many details all the time. Each day is a struggle for me to process all that information and try to put it in some coherent sort of form so that I can get my needs met and hopefully make a positive contribution to my community. It is so much work, however, that it would make no sense if I could not have meaning and purpose in my life. And so in that sense, meaning and purpose are far more valuable to me than having cable television or lots of money or whatever other material thing you want to name. If it's not just about whether or not I have food on the table, it's whether or not I believe in feeding the person that I am. If I have become someone that I don't even respect, I don't have any justification for feeding such a person. I would not want, if I don't respect myself, I have no reason for wanting that life to continue. It would be essentially enabling someone to remain a slave who has no hope of ever being free again. What is the point of continuing that kind of torture? I'm not advocating for suicide here. What I'm advocating for is that we need to value our freedom, value our voices, value ourselves, value our creative contribution enough to believe in it more than we believe in the ability of others to limit us, more than we believe in the others to take from us what is most valuable, our very souls, our own voice. If I believe in the value of my soul, the value of my contribution, the value of others' contributions, speaking up for those people whenever necessary, speaking up for what is right, speaking up for self-agency and sovereignty and collaboration and love and peace. The verse that inspires me so much that I wandered off on a tangent here and never came back to yet until now, it was written by Martin Niemöller, who was I believe a Lutheran minister in Germany before the Second World War, and when I was reading about him, it was actually disappointing to find that before the war he was actually very anti-Semitic. He really did not have respect for Jewish people, or he devalued them. He didn't think that they mattered that much. And so, remarkably, he was among the few who did survive living in the concentration camps during the Second World War. And afterwards he penned a verse that's been paraphrased and rewritten in various ways, but it basically says, they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, so I said nothing. And they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I said nothing. And they came for the gypsies, and I wasn't a gypsy, so I said nothing. And they came for the Jews, and I wasn't a Jew, so I said nothing. There are various versions of this that go through lists of all sorts of different groups. The Nazis during the Second World War came for, I think it was actually 9 or 10 or more different classifications, political dissidents and Jehovah's Witnesses, and basically anyone who wasn't their idea of what a perfect citizen should be. And the frustrating thing about that, when you evaluate it, is that they weren't even the perfect people they said they should be. So essentially they were attacking everyone except themselves, and as if they had measured themselves against their own list, they would have had to attack themselves too. It was a sort of suicide of humanity committing suicide in a very psychotic sort of way. But Martin Niemöller, as he wrote this, came down to the conclusion, that at last they came for me. And by that time there was no one left to speak up. And that's the whole point. We speak up for others not because we agree with them, but because they're human beings. We speak up for the poor because they're human beings. We speak up for the marginalized people because they're human beings. We speak against wrong behavior because it is wrong behavior, not because of who the victim is. If we don't speak up, we may find ourselves like the time under the Nazis, and that is certainly not the only time that has happened in human history. There have been innumerable other times and places all over the world where it became too dangerous to speak up, because if you did speak up, you would be the next one that they arrested, that they killed, that they hauled away, never to be heard from again. it is by speaking up together and by speaking up for everyone and by speaking up for mutual respect and by speaking up for what is right and by being willing to take a stand, that society itself and the communities in which we live remain decent places to live. There are many times when I have to wonder if the rising statistics of suicide are specifically because the world has become a place that is unfit for anyone to live in. It has only become so because of the neglect and because of all the people who didn't speak up. I believe it was Martin Luther King who said, in the end we will remember not so much the words of our enemies as the silence of our friends. In speaking up, in finding our voice, in joining together, and I'm not recruiting for any particular cause, I'm saying, look within. We each have the potential to be a decent, conscientious person. We each have the ability to show up at a town meeting or a protest demonstration or wherever is necessary and announce to the leadership, you are now being held accountable. You will do what is right, or we will vote you out of office so fast it'll make your head spin. We will remove you from power. If the military itself were to recognize an erroneous order and an entire infantry were to sit down and say, no, this is wrong. We are not going in there. We are not going to shoot those people. We are not going to kill people we don't know for no reason. This has nothing to do with defending our country. This is a war for economic interest. This is a war for a political directive that makes no sense, that even the American people themselves would never support. This is some egotistical directive that has no wisdom in it. If we teach ourselves how to recognize those sorts of things and to band together, solidarity is always inspiring, but the population of the world has gotten so large that solidarity is the only thing that can affect the future anymore. We have come to the point where either we will rediscover the value of each other and we will work together, or we will all die together. Because it is only by working together that we're able to control and affect and hold accountable the massive systems that humanity has collectively created. To the extent that a few people are able to pull the strings and manipulate huge populations, humanity becomes like lemmings racing to the sea to be drowned and becoming nothing more than fish food. No one has really ever figured out why the lemmings race to the sea and feed themselves to the fish. Thankfully, there are fish, and nature sees how it participates in the overall cycle within the natural realm. But I have to wonder sometimes if the reason nature does that is as a warning to humanity that we do not become lemmings, that we stop and think, that we look in the mirror and see ourselves and see our faces, that we look in the mirror and see our souls. In the literary work, The Picture of Dorian Gray is the story of a young man whose soul becomes so ugly because he makes this vow, and by some sort of magic, his body ceases to age and he remains beautiful. But in taking that for granted and in remaining and stagnating in this beauty and in this form, he doesn't learn and grow. His soul does evils, but there is no punishment for it. There is no accountability. And the basic thread of the story is that he has essentially changed places with his picture. And where a picture would not change because it is painted on canvas, the picture is now changing, aging, and showing every stroke of evil that he has ever done. And he is remaining as the picture, pristine and beautiful and youthful as the years pass. In the end, he cannot face what he sees in the picture because he sees the picture as a mirror of his soul. And in the end, the way the book is written, goes to the picture and wanting to rid himself of the evil he feels inside, even though it is not seen on the outside. he stabs the picture, and in that moment the two switch back. And all they find in the room, when after hearing the scream, the people come running up the stairs, and they find in the room the original painting of this youth and this horribly disfigured person on the floor with a knife in his chest. That was a warning. It was a literary warning to all of us to be aware of what is going on the inside, that we are not only the superficial people we see on the outside. We are who we think and who we love and who we feel also. We are who we respect. By mutual respect and by speaking up for those who have no voice or have no voice within certain contexts. There are those who have voices within government halls, and there are those who don't. There are those who have voices within educational arenas, and there are those who don't. We have to remember, as Benjamin Franklin wrote so many years ago, 200 years ago, that either we all hang together or we all hang separately. We're all in this together. There is no one who doesn't matter, because at some point each of us is someone else's someone else. The common witticism is that it always happens to someone else. Well, at some point each of us is someone else's someone else. It always happens to someone else. Well, this time it happened to me. I've heard a lot of people who ponder all of this, though, become very cynical and pessimistic, and I don't know that that's really warranted. I would prefer to agree with Gandhi that at heart, most people are actually good, and the first indication of this is that whenever there is a natural disaster, a flood, a hurricane, a tornado, for the first few days, everybody is helping everybody, and nobody asks what race you are, whether you have lots of money or little, whether you're a pillar of the community or whether you're a janitor at a school. The fact is you're there and you're working together to recover from a disaster, and everybody helps everybody, and the fact that you're alive makes you matter, because everybody who's alive can work together in a fashion that perhaps we haven't really seen since tribal times. That is, to Gandhi, was the indication that people are fundamentally good, because faced with that kind of situation, the goodness all comes out, and we start helping each other, and we perhaps even risk our lives to crawl down in a hole and pull, the stories of people rescuing dogs and cats that have fallen into holes, and all sorts of other animals as well. The generosity of the human spirit is amazing, and the dedication of the human spirit to rescuing people in distress and helping those in need. There is so much positive potential. It is the systems that have been created that have been exploited by those with questionable motives, selfish agendas. These are the things that make layer upon layer of mud and woundedness over the tops of these beautiful souls. For some people, I think it is the real challenge is getting beyond all of that, getting back to the beauty inside. And I don't know that it's a question that should be answered, but it's a question that I think needs to be asked. Is there any degree of woundedness, any degree of abuse that is so severe that a human being should not be expected to ever recover from such deep, deep hurt? For the moment, especially as a minister, I pray for healing, and I pray that there is some miracle by which even the most wounded person can find their way to healing, find their way back to their humanity, back to their ability to love and to forgive. The world is populated by a lot of wounded and broken people. There needs to be forgiveness and understanding of that, but we need to go about it in a way that doesn't enable the problem to continue. It is not that we allow the alcoholic to remain an alcoholic. It's that we remind the alcoholic there's a beautiful person in there who deserves better than running away from something that seems so terrible it cannot be faced. At the heart of virtually every addiction story I've ever heard is something that the person thought they could never face. Some terrible truth, some terrible discovery, something they didn't want to be true. People who have discovered themselves to be gay and didn't want to be gay so badly that they would drink themselves into oblivion over and over and over again, because if they were gay, then their family wouldn't accept them. They might lose their job, they might lose their place of residence, they might be homeless, all sorts of terrible things. They might lose their standing in a church. Maybe they're a deacon or a pastor in a church and have never been able to accept that they're gay. And so privately, quietly, in whatever way, they drink themselves to oblivion. They use some addictive substance trying to run away from their own truth, instead of accepting that the truth is there for a reason, and in and of itself the truth is neither good nor bad. It's a question of what you do with it. It's a question of how it moves you to compassion, how it moves you to understanding, how it moves you to a greater depth of life experience, of how it inspires you to leave something behind when you're gone that makes the world a better place. The point of love is not whether you love someone of the opposite gender or someone of the same gender. The point of love is that you love unconditionally, that you value someone's happiness even more than your inclusion in it,